Hello. I felt it would be prudent to explain my views on how to ultimately reduce rape in Western society. Unfortunately, even though a single rape is still too many, I do not believe that it can ever be completely eliminated as long as free will exists. That being said, there are definitely measures that can be taken that will lower the risks of any given individual being raped. Now, there are two main theories as to how to reduce the rate of rape. One focuses on teaching potential rapists not to rape, primarily through consent courses, and one focuses on teaching potential victims how to minimize risk and defend themselves. In this video, I will examine both of these positions and discuss their pros and cons. I will also give my own opinions on the matter. Now, before I continue, I'd like to make it clear that I am not referring to the legal definition of rape, which in most Western countries requires penetration, but I am instead referring to any sex act in which the victim cannot or refuses or withdraws consent. By this definition, both men and women can be rapists and can be the victims of rape. This also does not include intoxicated sex necessarily, except in the case of one person being too drunk to be reasonably expected to control themselves, and another person who directly takes advantage of this fact. Okay, now that that's out of the way, let's start by looking at consent courses. These work by explaining how consent works in order to hopefully discourage people from unintentionally having non-consensual sex. For the time being, let's just look at consent courses as a concept rather than in practice. If done properly, it would ensure that a high percentage of the population understands exactly how consent works, and as the majority of people are not the kind who would intentionally violate somebody, this would ultimately prevent people from being raped due to misconceptions about consent. For example, there is a belief that if a man has an erection, it constitutes consent. This also contributes to the idea that men cannot be raped by women because they must have wanted it. In this way, consent courses could reduce the risk of this misconception leading to a rape. Of course, there are also a myriad of other situations that would be affected similarly, such as the consideration that being forced to receive oral sex is not rape, or that it is not considered rape if the victim retracts consent while actively engaged in sex and the sex act doesn't end there and then. Of course, the concept of consent courses is not perfect. Many, and I'd argue most rapists, don't rape because of some misunderstanding. They rape because they don't care if they get consent, or they want a way to exercise power over their victim. That means that even if consent courses were 100% efficient, they wouldn't completely stop rape. That's not even mentioning that consent courses in practice are very flawed. The vast majority of them, at least here in the US, are focused towards men and boys. They're basically the incarnation of the phrase, teach men not to rape. Also, they do not apply what I believe to be common sense. For example, many of these classes claim that in any scenario, if a woman has alcohol in her system and engages in sex, she was raped. Now, I'm sure any logical person would agree that if somebody is blacked out drunk, they can't consent. But if someone just had one drink, they still have all their personal agency, and therefore can consent. Also, they generally completely ignore the factor of how much alcohol the man has consumed. According to the logic of many of these classes, if a mildly tipsy woman takes advantage of a blacked out man, he raped her. The fact that they tend not to be gender neutral, and the fact that their logic can sometimes be pretty fishy, means that I don't think they're particularly effective in their current form, and that consent courses are much more valid in theory than in practice, at least the way they are currently. I actually had to go through a consent course, and even then, and this was before I started thinking critically about these issues, I could see the flaws, at least some of them. This was during my senior year of high school. During one health class, we had a pair of presenters basically come in and give us a consent course in lieu of a regular class. They went over a bunch of things, and some of which were admittedly very useful, such as fully explaining my state's age of consent laws, and defining the lines between what is legally considered rape and what isn't. They also told some stories, and encouraged everyone to view their male friends as potential rapists, using almost those exact words, and then they held a Q&A session at the very end. So during this Q&A session, I asked a question. They had previously said that consent was not possible if you have any alcohol in your system, and they equated all drunk sex with rape. So I asked what would happen if a man and a woman mutually agreed to have sex while they were sober, then they both got out, got equally drunk, and then had sex while still intoxicated. The response was that the man raped the woman, and I immediately knew that they were full of shit. Their logic was not consistent, and they didn't care that it wasn't consistent. Now, on to the second position regarding reducing rape. This one can be boiled down as encouraging the potential victim to take steps to ensure their own safety. This includes learning self-defense and taking precautions such as not leaving a drink unattended or having a friend watch your back. The benefits of this kind of approach are pretty self-evident. People will better be able to keep themselves safe. If it's harder for rapists to rape, then it logically follows that there will be fewer rapes. The flaw comes in the fact that it can be seen as treating the symptom and not the disease. While it does ultimately prevent rape, it does not address the underlying issue of why people rape in the first place. If people do not rape because they do not have the opportunity to rape, it does not fix them at an emotional or mental level. While I agree that that is a valid issue that needs to be addressed, I believe that any reasonable measure that helps prevent rape is beneficial to society, even if it's incomplete. One of the most common arguments that I've encountered is that encouraging such measures is victim blaming. Now, I try to remain relatively neutral as much as possible, and I hate taking sides, but I only see this mentality coming from feminists. The vast majority of non-feminists and anti-feminists agree that encouraging self-defense is not victim blaming. That being said, even though that sentiment is very close to being unique to feminists, it is not universal among feminists. I have encountered many feminists, both in person and online, who agree with me fully that that belief is stupid and harmful. Now, I don't think either of these positions, consent courses or self-defense courses, is the solution, at least not on their own. I think that a combination of the two is the best way to ultimately reduce rapes as much as possible. A revamped version of consent courses combined with safety awareness campaigns and self-defense courses would prevent rapes before and as they happen. Of course, there may be an even better solution out there that I haven't even considered. But I know that when properly applied, consent classes help, and safety awareness helps. Both together could very well add up to be greater than the sum of their parts. Well, I've said my piece on the subject. Do you agree with me? Disagree? Partially agree? Let me know. I started this channel to have and further discussions. If you have any thoughts, please leave a comment, and of course, thanks for watching.
May the force be with you.